It was Christmas Eve, 1945, when the phone rang in the Sodder house for the second time, and the voice on the line laughed like someone who already knew what was coming. The first call, just past midnight, had been strange enough. A woman giggling, asking for a name Jenny Sodder had never heard. Jenny hung up, irritated, and noticed the downstairs lights still burning, the curtains wide open. The older children had promised to turn everything off. She closed the curtains herself, locked the front door she could have sworn was already locked, and went back to bed. The house settled into the deep quiet of a West Virginia winter night, only the wind worrying the colored bulbs outside and the faint creak of the roof cooling under fresh snow. At 1:30 a.m. the second call came. This time no one spoke, just breathing, slow and deliberate, and that same low laugh fading into static. Jenny slammed the receiver down. That was the last time the phone in the house ever worked. Minutes later, she smelled smoke. The fire moved like it had been invited. Flame shot straight up the staircase, sealing the second floor in seconds. George was already screaming the children's names. Jenny and the four oldest made it out the front door into knee-deep snow, but the five youngest, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jenny Jr. 8, and Betty 5, were trapped in the attic bedrooms. George sprinted barefoot to his work trucks. The ladder he kept chained to the side of the flatbed was gone. The chain lay cut on the ground, links bright as new pennies. He tried to move the coal trucks closer to use as a platform. Both engines turned over but refused to start, even though they'd run perfectly hours earlier when he parked them. Neighbors finally raised the fire department from town 6 miles away. The trucks took over an hour to arrive, unheard of, even on icy roads. By then, the house was a glowing shell. It collapsed inward with a sound like a giant exhaling, and the Christmas lights outside melted into dripping rivers of color that hissed in the snow. When daylight came, the ruin was wrong. A house that size should have left bones, teeth, something. Firemen poked through the ashes and found the kitchen stove still intact, a cast-iron monster that should have melted at those temperatures. They found Fanny's sewing machine, warped but recognizable. They found nothing of 5 children. The official explanation arrived quickly. Cremation. Temperatures hot enough to reduce bodies to ash. Case closed. But the Sodders had seen hotter fires. George ran a trucking company. He knew furnaces. He hired his own experts. Tests showed the blaze never exceeded 1,000 degrees, nowhere near the 2,000 needed for complete cremation. And stranger, no one had smelled burning flesh that night. Only pine and melting plastic from the Christmas decorations. That was just the beginning. A telephone repairman climbed the pole the next day and found the lines sliced clean with a blade, not burned. Someone had thrown a set of melted electrical fuses onto the property days later, claiming that was the cause, but the house wiring had been inspected weeks earlier and passed. A traveling salesman admitted on his deathbed that he'd been paid to steal the ladder and sabotage the trucks. He never learned why. The sightings started almost immediately. A woman running a roadside diner in Charleston saw 5 children, clean and well-dressed, sitting at her counter at 3 a.m. on Christmas morning. They ordered hot chocolate and spoke politely. When she turned to pour, they were gone, cups untouched. Another report from a motel in Florida. 5 kids checked in with a man and woman who paid cash and spoke with Italian accents. The night clerk remembered because the youngest girl kept asking when they could go home for Christmas. The most chilling came in 1968. An unmarked envelope arrived at the new Sodder home. Inside was a single photograph. A young man in his early 20s standing beside a palm tree, dark hair, sharp cheekbones. On the back, in a child's careful printing, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. The family nearly collapsed. It was Louis aged forward exactly. Handwriting experts said the message was written by someone who had been 9 years old when Louis disappeared. The postmark was smudged, but the paper was old, wartime stock. They hired private detectives. The trail looped through orphanages, circus troops, even a Catholic monastery in Texas where a silent novice bore an uncanny resemblance to Maurice. Every lead dissolved like smoke. The surviving children grew up haunted in ways no one talked about. Sylvia, only 3 in 1945, woke for decades screaming that she heard her brothers and sisters crying in the walls. John once found 5 small bare footprints in the fresh concrete of his new driveway, perfect as if pressed by children standing in wet cement that had already begun to set. The billboard George erected on Route 16 stood for 45 years. Rain faded the children's faces, but every Christmas someone replaced the flowers at its base. Drivers still slow down when they pass it, even though the sign came down in 1989 after Jenny died. Some say on foggy Christmas mornings the faces reappear, not paint, but light, glowing softly in the mist like the strings of bulbs that melted that night. And the strangest detail of all came from the fire chief himself, years after he retired. On his deathbed, he confessed he'd been ordered to end the search early, by whom he took that secret with him. But he whispered that when they sifted the ashes one last time, they found something they buried under a heap of official lies. A single child's vertebra, cracked but intact. It was never logged, never tested, just quietly reburied under the rose garden George planted where the bedrooms used to be. Every Christmas Eve, the surviving Sodders, now old themselves, still set 5 places at their table. They leave the porch light on, and sometimes just after midnight, the phone that hasn't worked in decades will ring once. No one answers anymore. They're afraid of who might be on the other end. It was Christmas morning 1929 when Charlie Lawson paid the photographer in advance and told him to make the prints extra clear, because this picture is going to last forever. The Lawsons were simple tobacco farmers, but that day they looked like royalty. Fanny wore a new velvet dress the color of holly berries. The girls had ribbons in their hair. Even 4-month-old Mary Lou was dressed in lace. They posed around the parlor table with the Bible open between them, 7 children and their parents smiling like the world had finally decided to be kind. The photographer later said the room felt warm, almost glowing, and the camera flash seemed to linger longer than usual, as if the light itself didn't want to leave. 3 hours later, every one of them, except 16-year-old Arthur, sent on an errand, was dead. Charlie started with Fanny. She was on the porch feeding the chickens when the first blast took her in the face. Neighbors heard the shot and thought nothing of it. Country people hunted year-round. The second and third shots brought Carrie and Maybelle running from the barn. He beat them with a hoe handle first, then finished them with the shotgun. Inside, 12-year-old James tried to shield little Raymond and took both barrels in the back. Baby Mary Lou never woke up, skull crushed while she slept. Marie, the oldest daughter, 16 and beautiful, begged. Charlie reloaded, pressed the barrel to her chest, and whispered something no one would ever know before he pulled the trigger. Then he laid them out neatly, palms folded, faces turned toward the Christmas tree like they were only sleeping, and walked into the woods. His footprints circled a single pine tree for hours. Searchers later counted over 200 laps, a perfect oval worn into the frost. At 4:17 p.m., he sat against the trunk, placed the shotgun under his chin, and ended it. The motive was never found. Charlie had no debts, no enemies anyone knew, no history of violence. He'd taken a head injury in a farming accident months earlier. Doctors said it might explain mood swings, but neighbors remembered him as gentle, almost shy. He'd been unusually generous that December, buying raisins and oranges for the children, new shoes for Fanny, even a wind-up phonograph so they could play carols. Almost like he was preparing a celebration no one else could see. Arthur came home to a silent farm. He found his family arranged like dolls and collapsed screaming in the yard. He lived another 65 years but never spent another Christmas in Stokes County. He told his own children the house itself had killed them, that something old and hungry lived in the walls and had finally spoken through his father. The house never stayed empty long, but no family lasted. Tenants reported the phonograph playing Silent Night at full volume in empty rooms. Children woke to find the Christmas portrait rehung above their beds, even when they'd burned the original. One couple fled after discovering the floorboards in the parlor had been pried up and their own family photos arranged exactly like the Lawsons, faces scratched out with what looked like fingernails. In 1948, a new autopsy on Charlie's exhumed body revealed a second skull fracture, fresh, delivered after death, impossible to self-inflict. The coroner quietly reburied the coffin before anyone could ask questions. The portrait became its own curse. Copies surfaced in antique shops across the South. Every owner reported the same progression. First, the glass fogged as if breathed on from inside. Then the smiles changed, subtle at first, then wider, until the faces looked like they were screaming without moving their mouths. One collector in Richmond locked it in a vault. Security footage later showed the vault door opening by itself at 3:12 a.m. every Christmas morning. The photo was always back on the wall by dawn. Arthur's descendants still receive gifts. Every December 24, a plain brown package arrives, no return address, postmarked from Germantown even though the post office there closed in 1954. Inside, a single raisin, one orange, and a tiny black and white print of the 1929 portrait. The faces age a little more each year. Last Christmas, baby Mary Lou looked almost 1 year old. The old farm is forest now, but hunters avoid it. They say if you walk the property on Christmas Day, you can still smell pipe tobacco and fresh blood mixed with pine. Some have found circles worn into the frost, hundreds of boot prints going nowhere, ending at a pine tree that was cut down in 1930. And every year, exactly at 4:17 p.m. on Christmas afternoon, dogs for miles around begin to howl at nothing. Old-timers set their watches by it. They say time is a circle in that place, that Charlie is still walking, still choosing, still deciding whether this Christmas will be the one where he finishes what he started. Some mornings, the frost itself shows 7 sets of footprints leading from the woods to where the porch used to be, then turning around and walking back, waiting for Arthur's bloodline to come home. It was 9:28 p.m. on Christmas Eve 2008 when the doorbell of the Ortega house rang with perfect Christmas cheer. 3 short chimes followed by a deep, theatrical "Ho, ho, ho!" 8-year-old Katrina Ortega raced to answer it, barefoot on the tile, convinced Uncle Jose had hired a Santa again. Her mother laughed from the kitchen. "Tell Santa the cookies are almost ready." 25 relatives filled the Covina house, music, tamales, children tearing into early gifts. The front door opened onto pure nightmare. The man in the Santa suit was 6'3", beard snow white, costume rented that afternoon from a shop 30 miles away. He smiled down at Katrina, raised a 9mm semi-automatic, and shot her point blank in the face. The beard muffled the sound just enough that the first scream came a full second later. Bruce Pardo, bitter ex-husband of the family's beloved Leticia, had come prepared. Under the red velvet coat, he wore a mechanic's jumpsuit rigged with compressed air tanks and a homemade flamethrower. In his gift sack, 4 more handguns and a gasoline sprayer disguised as a wrapped present. He moved through the house like he'd rehearsed it for years, shooting, igniting, laughing under the beard in a voice too deep to be human. Ornaments exploded into glass shrapnel. The Christmas tree became a blowtorch. Wrapping paper caught and curled like burning skin. Some tried to run. He hunted them down, bells jingling softly with every step. One cousin hid in a bedroom closet and heard the slow drag of boots across carpet, the whisper of, "I know you're in here," in a voice that sounded like Santa if Santa had swallowed gravel and hate. She survived by crawling out a window as flames licked the walls. When firefighters arrived, the house was an inferno. 9 bodies were recovered, some burned beyond recognition, some still clutching melted gifts. Pardo fled in a rented car, drove 30 miles to his brother's empty house, doused himself with gasoline from the spare tank he kept in the trunk, and shot himself. The Santa suit melted into his skin. Firefighters had to peel red polyester off bone to identify him. That should have been the end, but Christmas refused to let it die. The surviving Ortegas rebuilt on a different street. The 1st December in their new home, the doorbell rang at 9:28 p.m. sharp. No one was there, only a single red mitten on the mat, smelling faintly of smoke. Security cameras showed nothing, no one approached, no wind moved it into frame, just the mitten appearing between one frame and the next. Every year after, the gifts began arriving, never with postage, simply left on doorsteps, porches, once inside a locked car, always wrapped in the same red and white paper, always the exact size and weight of the fake present Pardo had used to hide his sprayer. Inside, nothing, or sometimes a single spent 9mm casing still warm to the touch. Leticia, the ex-wife who'd survived by hiding under the dining room table, started waking to find soot footprints circling her bed, large boot prints with bells etched into the tread pattern. The prints always stopped at the bedroom mirror. Some mornings, the glass was fogged with a perfect handprint, palm smeared with ash, fingers too long. In 2014, a new family moved into the rebuilt lot on the original street. They lasted 11 months. The wife called police hysterical one Christmas morning, claiming a man in a charred Santa suit stood in their backyard holding a little girl's melted doll. When officers arrived, the figure was gone, but the doll lay in the grass, still smoking though the temperature was 32 degrees. Security footage from neighbors captured 37 seconds no one can explain. A red shape walks up the empty driveway at 9:28 p.m. on December 24, stands motionless in front of the door for 20 seconds, then walks away. The doorbell never rings, motion sensors never trigger. The figure simply exists in the footage like a tear in reality. Katrina, the little girl shot in the face, survived against all odds. Doctors rebuilt her jaw with titanium plates. Every Christmas Eve, she wakes screaming that she hears bells coming from inside her skull. In 2022, an MRI revealed something impossible, a perfect circle of metal fragments embedded in a pattern that, when enhanced, forms tiny bells. The surgeons who removed the initial bullet fragments swear they took everything out. Last year, the surviving Ortegas received a new kind of package. Inside the familiar red paper, a DVD labeled Naughty or Nice 2024. When played, it shows 30 minutes of their own homes filmed from inside bedrooms at night, children sleeping, Christmas trees glowing. The camera never moves like a human holding it, it drifts. At the 29-minute mark, a gloved red hand reaches into frame and places a gift under each tree. The timestamp on every recording is 9:28 p.m. December 24 hours before the packages were actually discovered. They stopped opening the gifts, started leaving town entirely for the holidays, but distance doesn't matter. Last Christmas, one branch of the family spent the week in a hotel in Vancouver. At 9:28 p.m. Pacific time, exactly the moment it would have been in Covina, the fire alarms went off on their floor. When they opened the door, smoke poured out. Firefighters found a single melted Santa hat in the hallway, still burning with no fuel source. The bells are the worst part. Survivors say once you've heard them mixed with screams, you never stop. They ring in empty churches at midnight mass. They echo in mall speakers playing carols. One woman claims she heard them inside the womb when she was pregnant, her unborn son kicking in perfect rhythm. This year, the Covina Police Department quietly removed all Santa suits from their annual toy drive. They won't say why. And somewhere, every Christmas Eve at 9:28 p.m., doorbells across Los Angeles County ring once for no reason. Homeowners open up to empty porches and the faint smell of pine and gasoline. They close the door quickly. They know better than to ask who's there. It was 3:17 a.m. on December 26, 1996, when Patsy Ramsey's scream cut through the silent Boulder house like a shard of ice. I was 12 that year, living 3 streets over in the same quiet grid of million-dollar homes where kids still rode bikes to school and nobody locked their doors. Our Christmas lights were still blinking when the police cars started rolling past, red and blue strobing across fresh snow. By sunrise, every adult in the neighborhood knew JonBenet was gone. The call came in at 5:52 a.m. Patsy told the operator her 6-year-old daughter had been kidnapped. She'd found a ransom note on the spiral staircase, 3 handwritten pages demanding $118,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus. The note was signed SBTC Victory. The voice on the 911 tape was frantic, but the house, when police arrived, was strangely still. No footprints in the snow outside, no signs of forced entry, just the Christmas tree glowing in the dark living room and a bowl of pineapple on the kitchen counter that nobody remembered putting there. 8 hours later, John Ramsey carried his daughter's body up from the basement himself. She was wrapped in a white blanket, wrists bound with cord, mouth sealed with duct tape. A red heart had been drawn on her tiny palm in what looked like lipstick. The garland lights from the stair rail were still tangled in her blonde hair. The crime scene was already ruined, friends streaming in and out, detectives with no protocol, the house never properly sealed. By the time the coroner arrived, the most important room in America had been touched by dozens of hands. And then the case began to rot in plain sight. The ransom note was too long, too theatrical. The handwriting experts argued for years. Some said Patsy, some said an intruder, some said both. The garrote around JonBenet's neck was fashioned from one of Patsy's paintbrushes, the cord cut from a length found in the basement. A child's scream, police later learned, had been recorded on a neighbor's answering machine at 2:06 a.m., sharp, unmistakable. But the neighbor slept through it and only discovered the tape weeks later. The pineapple was the quietest detail that screamed the loudest. Undigested chunks were found in JonBenet's stomach. The bowl in the kitchen had Burke's fingerprints on it. He was 9. He was home. He was never treated as a suspect. The house itself became a character no one could kill. After the Ramseys moved out in 1997, it sat empty for years, Christmas lights still strung across the eaves because no one dared take them down. Realtors showed it at dusk so buyers wouldn't notice the way the basement window seemed to breathe when you stood too close. Every family that moved in lasted less than a year. The first owners, a tech couple from California, left after 6 months. They told friends the Christmas decorations rearranged themselves overnight, ornaments spelling JON on the tree one morning, BENET the next. They found the ransom note photocopied and slipped under their bedroom door, ink still wet. They moved back to Palo Alto and refused to say the address out loud ever again. In 2003, a young family with a 5-year-old daughter bought it at auction, desperate for the prestige. On their first Christmas Eve, the little girl woke screaming that a blonde girl in a silver crown was sitting at the foot of her bed, asking why she got to open presents and she didn't. The parents found the basement door standing open, a single red heart drawn on the concrete floor in what smelled like stage makeup. They were gone by New Year's. By 2012, the house had been on and off the market 17 times. A pastor bought it, planning to exorcise whatever lingered. He lasted 11 days. He told the Boulder Daily Camera off the record that every night at 3:17 a.m. exactly, the Christmas tree lights came on by themselves. Not the plug-in kind, the old-fashioned bulbs that had been removed years earlier, just soft, multicolored glow through the windows, pulsing like a heartbeat. On the 11th night, he went down to the basement with his Bible and found the white blanket folded neatly on the floor where JonBenet had been discovered. It hadn't been there before. He left the key under the mat and never returned. The current owners live out of state and rent it to documentary crews. They insist on one condition: no one spends the night of December 25th inside. The last team that tried, some YouTube true crime channel in 2021, lost 8 hours of footage. Their cameras recorded static from 11:58 p.m. to 8:03 a.m., but the audio captured something else: a child singing Jingle Bells in a breathy pageant voice, over and over, perfectly in tune. When the file was enhanced, a second voice joined in, older, male, whispering the ransom note word for word between verses. The Boulder police still get calls every Christmas week. Homeowners on Mapleton Hill report seeing a small figure in a sequined pageant dress standing under the streetlights, barefoot in the snow, looking up at houses with Christmas trees in the window. When they open the door, she's gone, but tiny wet footprints lead away, then stop abruptly, as if someone lifted her into the air. In 2016, on the 20th anniversary, a package arrived at the Ramsey family office in Atlanta. No return address. Inside, a single VHS tape labeled JonBenet's Last Christmas Pageant, 1996. The family never released footage from that final performance. When Burke, now in his 30s, played it, the screen showed the familiar stage, the glittery crown, the smile. But halfway through her routine, the camera zoomed in too close, too steady, like someone standing inches away. JonBenet looked straight into the lens and mouthed 3 silent words no one could read. The tape ended with 30 seconds of black, and then a child's voice, clear as bells. "Daddy's looking for me in the wrong place." The tape self-erased within hours. Tex recovered nothing. Every year, the house on 15th Street still gets Christmas cards addressed to JonBenet, hundreds of them, some with glitter, some with pressed flowers, some just a single red heart drawn in crayon. The post office delivers them because the forwarding order never expired. Current tenants find them stacked inside the mailbox like someone stood there for hours, sliding them through the slot one by one. Last Christmas Eve at 3:17 a.m. exactly, every car alarm on the block went off at once. Homeowners stumbled outside to find their windshields covered in children's handprints, small, perfect, made of melted snow that refused to drip. In the middle of the street, a single silver pageant crown sat spinning slowly, as if someone had just placed it there and stepped away. By the time police arrived, it had vanished. The Ramseys are gone now. John in 2022, Patsy long before. Burke lives quietly far away. The case is cold, the evidence degraded, the theories endless. But the house remembers. And every December 26th, at the exact moment Patsy's scream first tore through the silence, the Christmas lights on 755 15th Street come on, soft, multicolored, perfect. They stay lit for 8 hours, then they go dark again. Until next year. Because some stories don't end when the cameras leave. Some stories wait under the tree, wrapped in tinsel and duct tape, for someone new to open them.